The night always held a certain magic, an allure that only the most curious could resist. But for the patrons of the Circus de Rêves, it was more than just the cover of darkness, it was an invitation. An invitation to a world unlike any other. In a small, sleepy town on the edge of the world, no one had anticipated the arrival of the circus. There were no billboards, no grand parades or announcements. It appeared as suddenly and mysteriously as the moonlight itself, catching the eye of anyone who dared to look. By the time the evening sky faded into a deep shade of navy, the circus had already begun to weave its magical presence into the fabric of the town. The air, thick with an autumn chill, seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for something extraordinary to happen. It wasn't just the grand tents or the soft glow of lanterns that made the Circus de Rêves unforgettable. It was the way the ground beneath your feet felt different when you entered. It was the soft hum of something invisible in the air. The feeling of standing at the edge of an impossible dream, one that might slip through your fingers if you weren't careful. For Celia and Marco, the circus was not just a mysterious wonder that had appeared out of nowhere, it was a battleground, a place where their fates had been sealed long before they ever set foot inside. Introducing the characters. Celia, a young woman with midnight black hair that shimmered under the moonlight, eyes that could see through to your very soul, and a presence that commanded attention. Celia had been raised in isolation by her father, Hector, a master illusionist. He had long known of the extraordinary power that lay dormant inside her, a power that could bend reality, shape the world itself. But it was a power that she had been forbidden to embrace freely. Her world was one of discipline and restraint, but beneath her calm exterior, the sparks of rebellion flickered, rebellion not against the world, but against the very forces that sought to control her. Marco, from an entirely different world, Marco had been taken in as an orphan by a man known only as Mr. H., a mysterious figure whose quiet wisdom had shaped Marco's life. Raised not with the expectation of magical prowess but with the intense discipline of study, Marco had discovered his own latent abilities in the most unconventional of ways. It was books, arcane texts that he studied late into the night, that had taught him to manipulate magic. Unlike Celia, who had always known her gifts, Marco had stumbled upon his power almost by accident, through hours of reading and experimentation. But his path would cross Celia's, for the competition between them was inevitable, orchestrated by their mentors before they were even born. Hector, Celia's father, a man of few words, whose obsession with control had shaped his daughter's world. His magic was renowned across the globe, but his coldness and harsh discipline had isolated Celia. He saw her power as both a blessing and a burden, and he would go to any lengths to see her fulfill her destiny, whether she wanted it or not. Mr. H., the enigmatic figure who took Marco under his wing when he was just a child. Mr. H. was a man of silence, a master manipulator in his own right, who had recognized Marco's potential and nurtured it. His motives were hidden in shadow, as was his true identity. He had plans for Marco that stretched far beyond mere magic, plans that would change the very course of the circus and the fate of the two competitors. The arrival of the circus. As the first whispers of evening danced in the air, something strange began to happen. In a small corner of the town, the circus appeared without warning, as if the night itself had decided to manifest something magical. There were no fanfares, no advertisements. The circus simply emerged, like a dream, suddenly, impossibly, and irrevocably. The tents stretched high into the sky, their fabric rippling like the wings of an enormous bird taking flight. The soft glow of lanterns filled the air with a warm, inviting light. It was a place that seemed too perfect to be real, too beautiful to exist outside of a dream. The circus stood there, in the heart of the town, as though it had always belonged. By the time the first curious onlookers arrived, the gates were already open. They hesitated for a moment, as though uncertain if they should enter. But as they did, they were swept into the magic of the place. There were no lines, no tickets to purchase. Only a faint, echoing music that beckoned visitors deeper into the heart of the circus. As they crossed the threshold, something stirred within them, something that felt like hope, like the very air had been infused with possibility. Celia's first visit. Celia had heard the rumors, the whispers that had traveled across the town like a wildfire. The circus. The dreamlike place that had appeared overnight. She had no interest in it, at first, too many distractions, too much to do. But as the night deepened, and as the invisible pull of the circus began to tug at her, she found herself walking toward it. Not with curiosity, but with something more, a sense of inevitability. When Celia stepped through the gates, the world around her shifted. The quiet hum in the air grew louder, more pronounced. She could feel the energy of the place, the pulse of it, moving through her, weaving through her very being. It was the first time she truly felt magic in the air, felt it not just as a distant force, but as a living, breathing part of the world. And there, in the center of the circus, she saw him. Marco's first encounter. Marco had been drawn to the circus just as unexpectedly. He had heard the murmurs, the hushed excitement among the townspeople, and despite his better judgment, he found himself standing at the gates, feeling the magnetic pull of something much larger than himself. The circus wasn't just a place of wonder, it was a place of purpose, a challenge. As he entered, his senses were immediately overwhelmed. The colors, the sounds, the textures, they all wrapped around him like a dream he couldn't wake from. Marco's sharp eyes scanned the circus, observing the way the air shimmered, the way the performers moved. Everything was perfect. But underneath it all, he knew something deeper was at play. The magic in the air wasn't just for show, it was real. And it was calling to him. His heart skipped a beat when he saw her, Celia. The first challenge. The circus, beautiful and strange as it was, had come with a purpose. The ringmaster, a figure cloaked in midnight black, stepped forward as the crowd fell into an expectant silence. His voice echoed through the air. "Tonight, we begin the first act," he announced. "The act that will change everything. The act that will set the stage for a challenge unlike any other." The crowd leaned in, the energy in the air thick with anticipation. The circus was more than just a performance, it was the beginning of something larger. A game had been set in motion, one that no one would be able to stop. The circus, as promised, was not merely a spectacle of lights and performers. It was a world unto itself, a place where reality bent, twisted, and reformed like the very fabric of dreams. But beneath the beauty and allure of the tents, the performers, and the glowing lanterns, there was an undercurrent of tension that vibrated through every corner of the circus grounds. The challenge had begun, and neither Celia nor Marco could escape their destinies. Celia's growing restlessness. Celia had spent most of her life under the shadow of her father's strict guidance. Hector had always been clear about one thing: magic was a tool to be used with precision, with control. Magic was not to be played with, not to be seen as anything other than a means to an end. Yet, as she stood within the glowing heart of the Circus de Rêves, Celia felt an unfamiliar stirring deep within her, a pulse of power that wasn't quite like anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't the magic her father had taught her to manipulate, carefully and deliberately. It was wild, untamed, and full of promise. The circus was alive, and its magic resonated within her. She stood by the edge of the central ring, watching a performer juggle impossibly bright spheres of light. The crowd, mesmerized, cheered at each perfectly timed toss, but Celia's gaze never wavered from the orb of light hovering mid-air. Her fingers itched to reach out and touch it, to feel the crackle of magic dance across her skin. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Celia turned, startled. There, standing at the edge of the ring, was Marco. His presence was unexpected, out of place, almost, but there was something in his eyes, something that mirrored the curiosity that was growing inside her. His gaze wasn't on the performance, but on her. "I thought you were someone else," Celia said, her voice trailing off as she studied him carefully. Marco smiled, a quiet, almost knowing expression that didn't seem to quite match his youthful appearance. "I could say the same about you," he replied softly. "It's not every day that one finds someone who's so attuned to the magic." Celia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized it was so obvious. She hadn't meant to let anyone see the stirrings of power that had awakened in her since stepping foot into the circus. But Marco's eyes, sharp, observant, had seen straight through her. He stepped closer, though he didn't cross into the circle of light where she stood. Instead, he remained just out of reach, watching her with a gaze that was both distant and intimate, like someone who understood the secrets of the world but couldn't share them. "What is this place?" Celia asked, her voice barely a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile moment. Marco's eyes flicked toward the performers and the crowd, before settling back on her. "It's a place where the impossible becomes possible. But for people like us," he paused, as if searching for the right words. "It's a place where we're forced to confront what we are." Celia felt a chill run down her spine. Was this some kind of warning? Did he know about the competition that loomed over them? But before she could ask, a sudden noise pulled her from her thoughts, a series of ringing bells signaling the start of the evening's main performance. Marco's secret. Marco wasn't sure what he had expected when he had stepped into the circus. He had read stories, heard the whispers, but nothing had prepared him for this feeling of being drawn into something much larger than he had anticipated. His mentor, Mr. H., had always been a quiet presence in his life, but Marco could feel the weight of his expectations now, heavy and suffocating, lurking just beneath the surface of every interaction he had. It wasn't just that Marco had the power to manipulate magic, it was that he had been chosen to do so. Chosen to compete against Celia, a girl he had never met but whose name had been whispered in the same breath as his for as long as he could remember. He had never wanted this. He had never asked for this power. But it was his, and now the circus was forcing him to use it. "Isn't it beautiful?" a voice asked, pulling Marco from his thoughts. It was Poppet, a young contortionist with a gaze as clear and bright as the stars. She stood beside him, her movements fluid and graceful as she gazed at the circus. "Very," Marco replied, his voice distant. Poppet had become one of the circus's most beloved performers, and for good reason. Her ability to bend and twist her body into shapes no human should be able to achieve was legendary. But it wasn't just her talent that had earned her adoration, it was her connection to the circus itself. She, like all of the performers, had become an integral part of the magic that kept the circus alive. "I've never seen anything like it," Marco said, almost to himself. "You'll find that here," Poppet replied, smiling mysteriously. "There are many things you won't understand. But you'll learn." Marco didn't answer. He had no intention of staying here long enough to learn. But the circus seemed to have other plans for him. Plans that didn't involve escape. The challenge begins. As the night unfolded, the circus came alive in ways that Marco and Celia could not yet comprehend. Each performer, each act, was part of the larger design, part of the great challenge that had been set into motion the moment they had entered. They would be tested, each in their own way. Celia could feel it. The weight of it, the pressure in the air, thickening with every passing hour. She had seen the signs before, in her father's magic, in the way he had spoken of her future. But here, in the circus, it felt different. More real. More dangerous. A voice rose over the crowd, cutting through the murmur of excitement. The ringmaster, that dark figure who had first spoken of the challenge, stepped into the ring once more, his black cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. "This is only the beginning," the ringmaster said, his voice steady, commanding. "The circus has chosen its players, and now, the game begins. Only one will emerge victorious." The crowd fell silent. The air around them thickened, humming with anticipation. Celia looked at Marco, meeting his eyes for the first time since their brief exchange. And for the first time, she understood. This wasn't just about magic. This wasn't just about the circus. This was about a battle for something much greater. The challenge had begun, and there was no turning back. The days blurred together as the Circus de Rêves continued to unfurl its magic under the veil of night. Each evening, it drew crowds from across the city, but to those who truly paid attention, it was not just the performances that held them in rapture, it was the subtle pull of something deeper, something mysterious. Both Celia and Marco, though on separate paths, could feel the strings of destiny tightening around them, like the delicate threads that held the circus together. The challenge had begun in earnest, though neither of them knew exactly how it would unfold, or what the true cost would be. Celia's growing powers. Celia's life had always been shaped by her father's expectations, and now for the first time, she found herself in a world where she had to make decisions for herself. At the circus, she was no longer just Hector's daughter, his apprentice. She was something else. The magic she had been trained to control in secret for years was now coming to life in ways she could not predict. In the early mornings, before the circus opened, Celia would retreat into the quieter corners of the camp. The circus grounds, still covered in the soft shadows of dawn, were peaceful, almost serene. It was during these moments of solitude that Celia allowed herself to experiment, to reach for her magic, to see what it could do when no one was watching. At first, it was small things, shaping the breeze, making the flowers bloom at her touch. But as the days went by, she began to push her boundaries, testing her limits. She learned to weave illusions, her own creations taking form in midair, a flash of light, a twisting column of smoke, a soft snowfall in the middle of summer. But the more she practiced, the more she realized the circus wasn't just a stage, it was a living, breathing entity. Her magic was not just responding to her will, it was responding to the circus itself. It was as though the two were intertwined, as though the circus was calling to her, guiding her hand. One afternoon, while practicing her illusions beneath the large oak tree near the edge of the circus grounds, Celia noticed something new. As she summoned a spark of light to float above her palm, the light didn't simply hover, it moved, curving in patterns, as though it were alive. And then it disappeared, vanishing into thin air, leaving a trail of sparkling dust in its wake. Celia blinked, startled. She had never created such a thing before. What was it? And why did it feel as though it were a message, a sign from the circus itself? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind her. "You've been practicing." Celia turned, her heart skipping a beat. It was Marco. He had found her again. Marco's unease. Marco had spent the last several days absorbing everything around him with a quiet intensity. The circus, with its magic and mystery, both thrilled and unnerved him. He could feel the weight of the challenge, the responsibility that had been thrust upon him, yet he didn't know what the game entailed or how he was supposed to play it. For the most part, Marco kept to himself. He was not yet ready to reveal the depths of his power, nor was he eager to engage with the other performers. But as he wandered the grounds, he found himself constantly drawn to the center of the circus, toward Celia. He had known from the beginning that she was part of the challenge. What he hadn't known, however, was just how much of a challenge she would be. Her presence was like a magnet, and despite himself, he couldn't help but be pulled toward her. He had seen her, the way she worked her magic, the way the circus seemed to respond to her touch. There was something raw and unrestrained about it, something that made Marco uneasy. He had always prided himself on his intellect, his careful study of the arcane and the mystical. But Celia was different. She didn't think, she simply did. Perhaps that was why he sought her out that afternoon. Practice. Marco's voice was soft, almost too quiet as he spoke. Or is it something more? Celia gave him a curious look, but she didn't answer immediately. She had learned not to trust people easily. Her father had taught her that. And though Marco had an air of mystery about him, she couldn't shake the feeling that he, too, was bound to the same invisible strings of fate. Something more, Celia said, her gaze never leaving his. The circus, it's responding to me. To us. It's almost like it knows what I'm going to do before I do it. Marco's lips pressed into a thin line as he absorbed her words. I felt it too, he said, his voice low. The circus, it's not just a backdrop for the performances. It's part of the challenge. It's watching us, guiding us, shaping what happens next. Celia studied him carefully, considering his words. There was truth in them, she could feel it. And what happens when it's over? She asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and caution. When the challenge is finished. Marco hesitated. I don't know. But I think we're supposed to be more than just pawns in this game. We have to make our own choices, find a way to break free of it. Before Celia could respond, a sharp, familiar voice rang out across the grounds. The ringmaster's call. The ringmaster's voice, deep and commanding, echoed through the circus grounds, pulling their attention away from each other. Celia and Marco turned in unison, both of them instinctively recognizing the urgency in the tone. Tonight, the ringmaster's voice boomed, we unveil the next act. The time for hesitation is over. The challenge continues, and only those who are willing to sacrifice everything will find victory. The ringmaster stepped forward, his silhouette framed by the warm glow of lanterns. His cloak billowed out around him, creating the illusion of a shadowy, otherworldly figure. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that matched the electricity in the air. Celia felt a jolt of unease, a sense of foreboding settling in her chest. The challenge, she realized, was no longer something abstract, something distant. It was here now, and it would take everything from her to survive it. Let the game begin, the ringmaster declared, his voice ringing out one final time. And as the circus came alive with a chorus of lights, sounds, and magic, both Celia and Marco knew that the real test was only just beginning. As the days and nights blurred together within the confines of the Circus de Rêves, both Celia and Marco found themselves caught in the web of magic, fate, and the strange contest that was being woven around them. The circus, once a wonder of beauty and mystery, was becoming more complex, darker, as though it held secrets too dangerous to uncover. Celia's isolation. Despite being surrounded by the circus performers, Celia often found herself alone. The strange magic that had stirred within her at the circus's arrival seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, but it also isolated her. She couldn't escape the feeling that the circus itself was watching her, waiting for her next move. It was a strange, unnerving sensation, one that seemed to come from the very air around her. Her father's teachings echoed in her mind, reminding her that her magic should be controlled, measured. But as she wandered through the circus grounds in the early morning hours, when no one else was around, she couldn't help but let her magic flow freely, testing her boundaries. That morning, as she approached the edge of the circus, her feet guided her to the same oak tree that had become her sanctuary. She could feel the soft hum of the circus beneath her feet, and the air was thick with the anticipation of something, though she wasn't sure what. Celia closed her eyes and raised her hand. The soft breeze shifted as if responding to her call. The leaves of the oak tree trembled, the colors brightening and deepening under her touch. With a soft whisper, she conjured a small ball of light, letting it hover just above her palm. For a moment it danced, swirling around her hand like a living thing, before it flickered and vanished into the air, leaving behind a trail of glittering stardust. A faint noise interrupted her focus. Celia opened her eyes to find Poppet standing a few feet away, watching her with a mix of curiosity and something deeper, recognition perhaps. "You're stronger than you realize," Poppet said softly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to match the silent tension in the air. Celia hesitated. "I didn't mean for anyone to see." Poppet smiled, a small, knowing smile. "It's not just about control, you know. It's about connection. The circus, the magic, it's all part of the same thing. But it chooses who it will reveal itself to, and it's clear it's chosen you." Celia looked down at her hands, still tingling with the echo of the magic she had just released. There was truth in Poppet's words. She could feel the circus's presence, its pulse in the air around her. But she still didn't understand it, not fully. And she wasn't sure she wanted to. "I don't know if I can handle it," Celia admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Poppet's eyes softened with sympathy. "You'll have to. The challenge isn't just about magic. It's about who you become when you face it." Before Celia could respond, the distant sound of bells rang out, signaling the beginning of the evening's performance. Poppet gave her a quick, encouraging nod before disappearing into the crowd, leaving Celia to reflect on the strange words. Marco's growing doubts. Marco had always prided himself on his intellect. His power had been cultivated from hours of study, of sifting through ancient texts and forgotten lore. But here in the circus, it wasn't just knowledge that mattered, it was intuition, connection. And that was something Marco was only beginning to understand. Though he had initially sought to keep his distance from Celia, he found himself drawn to her more often than he cared to admit. He couldn't explain it, something about the way she moved, the way she wielded her magic so effortlessly, it both fascinated and unnerved him. One evening, as Marco wandered through the winding paths of the circus grounds, he caught sight of her again, standing under the same oak tree. Her form was silhouetted against the soft glow of lanterns, her hand raised as though conducting some invisible orchestra. Without thinking, Marco stepped closer, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. He couldn't tear his gaze away as he watched her summon a flicker of light, holding it suspended in mid-air. There was no doubt in his mind, Celia was a force to be reckoned with. The magic, too, was unlike anything Marco had ever encountered. It wasn't the calculated, studied incantations he was used to. It was raw, untamed, and most troubling of all, it was deeply connected to the circus itself. Just as Marco stepped forward, about to make his presence known, he stopped. Celia's head snapped up, her eyes searching the darkness. For a split second, their gazes met, and something passed between them, something he couldn't quite identify, but it felt like an understanding. A connection. Before he could say anything, Celia lowered her hand, and the light vanished. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the depths of the circus grounds without a word. Marco lingered in the shadows, his heart racing. He knew the circus had chosen them both. But what did that really mean? What would the cost be? The ringmaster's decree. The ringmaster had been quiet for the past few days, his shadowy presence lingering in the background as the circus continued its performances. But on this evening, as the performers gathered for the next act, he stepped into the center ring, his tall figure casting a dark silhouette against the brightly glowing lanterns. "Tonight, the next stage of the game begins," the ringmaster's voice echoed through the grounds, deep and commanding. The crowd fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Celia and Marco both felt the tension tighten around them, like a noose slowly pulling them closer together. Each of you will face your own test, the ringmaster continued, his eyes sweeping over the gathered performers, though it felt as though he were speaking directly to Celia and Marco. You will be challenged to prove your strength, your resolve. And when the time comes, you will make a choice. The word sent a shiver down Celia's spine, and she looked to Marco, only to find that he was already staring at her. There was no hiding now. Whatever this challenge was, whatever the cost would be, they were in it together. The ringmaster's eyes flicked from one to the other, a brief, almost imperceptible smile crossing his face. The game has only just begun, he said, his voice dark and final. And I promise you, there will be sacrifices. The decision looms. As the ringmaster's words hung in the air, both Celia and Marco understood something essential. The circus was not merely a battleground, it was a place of transformation. It was not enough to possess magic, it was not enough to simply play the game. The circus demanded more. It demanded everything. For Celia, the challenge was clear. She had always been a creature of magic, bound by her father's rules, but here in the circus she was free. And yet, that freedom came at a price. The circus had awakened something in her, something wild and powerful. But could she trust it? Could she control it? For Marco, the stakes were even higher. He had been raised on intellect and study, but here in this strange and magical place, he was forced to confront his own limitations. The power he wielded, learned from books and careful practice, seemed suddenly insufficient in comparison to the raw, untamed magic that surrounded him. Both of them knew that the time would soon come when they would have to choose. To commit fully to the circus, or to walk away. But as the evening's performance began, with the echo of the ringmaster's words still ringing in their ears, Celia and Marco knew that neither of them could turn back. They were part of something larger now, a game that would alter the course of their lives, their magic, and the fate of the circus itself. The circus had become more than just a place of wonder. It had become a battlefield, a place where the lines between illusion and reality blurred until neither seemed real. The sense of competition, the invisible threads connecting Celia and Marco, had grown tighter with each passing day. But there was something more, something that both of them had begun to sense more strongly than ever before. As the performances continued, so too did the pressure of the challenge they had unknowingly agreed to. The circus was no longer a playground, it was a test. And it was not just about magic anymore. It was about the choices they would have to make. And the price they would have to pay. Celia's growing frustration. Celia had always known that her father's expectations were high, but here in the circus, the stakes were even higher. The circus did not simply want her to perform, it wanted her to transform. To become something more. In the quiet solitude of her tent, she sat cross-legged, her mind swirling with thoughts she had never allowed herself to entertain before. She had always kept her magic contained, controlled. She had never allowed herself the freedom to let it take her. But here, surrounded by the constant hum of the circus's magic, she could no longer ignore the call. Celia's hands shook slightly as she reached for the small crystal in front of her, its surface smooth and cool to the touch. With a soft breath, she raised it into the air, watching it float as if weightless. A faint blue glow surrounded it as she concentrated, but as she focused more intently, the glow began to pulse erratically, flashing brighter and dimmer in rapid succession. She felt the familiar twinge of frustration build within her, the feeling that she wasn't yet in full control of this wild, untamed power. Every time she tried to push herself further, she was met with resistance, something deeper, something the circus itself was putting in her path. The crystal fell to the ground with a soft, defeated clink. Celia stared at it for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. The magic that had first come so easily to her now seemed out of reach, always just beyond her grasp. Why? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. She stood quickly, wiping her hands on her skirt before opening it to find Poppet standing there, her usual smile replaced with a look of quiet concern. "You've been here all day," Poppet said softly, stepping inside. "You need to come out. The circus is calling to you." "I can't get it right," Celia muttered, her voice laced with frustration. "Every time I try, it slips away. This magic, it's different. It's not like my father's teachings. It's harder." Poppet's eyes softened with understanding. "That's because it's not meant to be controlled. The circus doesn't bend to you, Celia. It's asking you to meet it halfway. You can't force it. You have to become part of it." Celia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of Poppet's words. It was true. She had always seen her magic as something she could control, something she could command with a wave of her hand. But the circus didn't work that way. It was alive in ways she couldn't comprehend. I don't know if I can, Celia whispered, her voice cracking slightly. What if it's too much? What if I lose myself in it? Poppet placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then you will find yourself in ways you never imagined. But you won't be alone, Celia. You have the circus, and you have us. You don't have to do it alone. Marco's struggle. Marco, too, was beginning to feel the weight of the challenge pressing down on him. He had always been confident in his intellect, in his ability to decipher ancient texts and manipulate the magic he had learned from them. But the circus was different. The magic here wasn't something he could study, it was something he had to feel. Each day, he found himself trying to recreate the feeling he had experienced the first time he stepped into the circus, the sense that everything around him was connected by invisible threads. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't recapture that same sense of power. His magic was steady and calculated, but it wasn't wild, it wasn't alive. And then, there was Celia. Marco couldn't shake the feeling that the circus was drawing them together for a reason. They had been chosen, both of them, for this challenge. But what did it mean? And why was it that every time he looked at her, he felt both drawn to her and threatened by her? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his door. He opened it to find Mr. H standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "It's time," Mr. H said simply, his voice cold and distant as always. Marco's heart sank. He knew what Mr. H was referring to. The challenge. The time to confront whatever the circus demanded from him. "I'm ready," Marco replied, though the words felt hollow. "You will be," Mr. H said with a nod. "The circus has chosen you. It has chosen both of you." Marco's heart pounded in his chest. He had spent so much time thinking about what he needed to do, about how he could win this challenge. But now, standing in front of his mentor, he realized something that made his stomach twist with unease. He had never truly understood what winning this game would cost him. The ringmaster's game. That evening, the circus reached its most thrilling crescendo yet. The air was thick with magic as the performers prepared for the night's events. Celia and Marco stood on opposite sides of the circus grounds, their eyes unknowingly drawn to one another in the dim light. The ringmaster's voice rang out, amplified by the eerie silence that had settled over the crowd. "Tonight, the game takes on a new form. Tonight, you will be tested, not just for your abilities, but for your will, your spirit. There are choices that must be made. Choose wisely." The crowd hushed, and the energy of the circus seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeat. For Celia and Marco, the game was no longer a distant concept, it was here now, in front of them. The ringmaster's gaze swept over the performers, his eyes lingering for a moment longer on Celia and Marco. "Only those who are willing to pay the price will survive," he intoned, his voice echoing in the night. "Let the challenge begin." The price is revealed. Celia's heart raced. The circus was calling to her, and this time, it was not with the same sense of awe she had felt before. It was demanding something. Something she wasn't sure she could give. Marco's hands trembled as he watched the ringmaster's figure fade into the shadows, knowing that the moment of truth was fast approaching. There was no turning back now. The circus had chosen them, but what it would take from them both, none of them could yet know. The night held a strange energy as the circus continued to unfold its enchantments. The air hummed with the quiet intensity of impending change. Celia and Marco had reached a crossroads, and both of them could feel it, the shifting tide that would carry them deeper into the heart of the circus's mystery. Their powers, once so seemingly in their control, had begun to slip through their fingers. What had once felt like a game was now a heavy, inescapable reality. As the circus continued to perform its nightly wonders, the weight of the challenge loomed larger, a dark cloud in the distance, creeping ever closer. Neither Celia nor Marco could avoid the truth any longer. They were not merely competitors in a game, they were the very essence of the circus's existence. Celia's moment of doubt. Celia stood at the edge of the circus grounds, watching the performers prepare for the evening's grand act. The cool night air tugged at her hair, but she didn't feel it. Her mind was consumed by thoughts of the choices she had yet to make. The circus had been calling to her for so long, its magic entwining with her own, but now, it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the rules, the discipline, the need for control. But the circus didn't care about rules. The circus was wild, untamed, and free. And she was starting to wonder if she was ready to let go of everything she had known, everything that had shaped her. She had always thought she was being groomed for greatness, for a future where her power could be used to shape the world around her. But now, the circus had shifted the very ground beneath her feet. It was no longer about power for the sake of control. It was about a deeper connection, a unity between her and the circus that neither she nor her father could have ever prepared her for. The ringing of bells pulled her from her reverie. It was time. Celia took a deep breath and stepped into the center of the grounds, the familiar hum of magic settling around her. But there was no excitement this time, no sense of anticipation. Only the quiet weight of knowing that whatever was to come, it would change everything. Marco's growing fears. Marco, too, felt the weight of the challenge. For the first time since arriving at the circus, he could feel his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. His magic, once so methodical, so controlled, now seemed inadequate. The circus had always been an intellectual puzzle to him, something he could decipher through logic and reason. But now it felt as if the rules were changing, as if he was being pulled into a world where logic had no place. The circus had become a puzzle he could no longer solve. He had spent so much of his life training for this moment, so sure of his own abilities, but he now felt like a stranger in a land he had only read about in books. The magic he wielded felt distant, intangible, slipping further away with every passing moment. But the most troubling part? It was Celia. From the moment he had laid eyes on her, there had been a connection, a silent, unspoken bond. He could feel the circus's pull on her, the way her magic danced and thrived in its presence. And the more he saw of her, the more he realized that she was not just a competitor. She was a force of nature. The circus had chosen them both, but Marco was beginning to understand that the real test was not about who would win, it was about what they were willing to sacrifice to keep playing. The ringmaster's call. As the night stretched on, the circus reached its peak. The ringmaster appeared once more, his black cloak flowing behind him like a shadow. His eyes gleamed as he surveyed the crowd, his gaze briefly meeting Celia and Marco's. The time has come, the ringmaster's voice rang out, deep and commanding, sending a ripple of tension through the air. The next act is one of choice, of consequence. You have reached the point where your destinies are no longer in your hands, but in the hands of the circus itself. You will choose your paths, and you will pay the price. Celia's heart skipped a beat, and Marco's breath caught in his chest. The weight of the words settled over them, heavy and suffocating. The circus had been a game, a mystery, a wonder. But now, it was a force beyond their control. We begin the next stage of the game, the ringmaster continued, his voice carrying the gravity of centuries. You will face your greatest trial yet. And when the time comes to make your choice, know this, the cost of victory may be your very soul. The ringmaster's words echoed into the silence that followed. Celia and Marco stood frozen, each grappling with the implication of his message. The circus was no longer just about magic. It was no longer about the thrill of the performance or the awe of the audience. It was about survival. It was about sacrifice. And the price? That was yet to be revealed. Celia's choice. That night, as the circus came to life with music and lights, Celia wandered deeper into its heart. The performers moved like shadows, their expressions fixed, their movements rehearsed, but to Celia, it all seemed like a facade. Behind the glittering smiles and carefully staged acts, the circus held something darker, a hunger that none of them could avoid. She couldn't stop thinking about the ringmaster's words. The price of victory may be your very soul. What did that mean? Was it true? Could she win this challenge, this game, without losing herself? Celia walked through the labyrinth of tents, lost in thought. She could hear the laughter and excitement of the crowd, the calls of the performers, but none of it reached her. She felt detached from it all, as though she were standing on the outside, looking in. And then she saw it. A dark tent stood at the end of the path, its entrance shrouded in shadows. She had never noticed it before, not in all her time at the circus. Something pulled her toward it, something irresistible, like a magnet drawing her closer. Without thinking, Celia stepped forward, the air around her growing colder as she entered. Inside the tent, there was only darkness, save for a single light that flickered at the far end. As she walked toward it, she saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was the ringmaster. "You've come to make your choice," he said, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. Celia swallowed hard. "I don't know what choice I'm supposed to make." The ringmaster's eyes gleamed, his smile mysterious. "That is for you to decide. The circus has already chosen its champions. But it is you who must decide what you are willing to sacrifice to win." Celia's breath caught in her throat. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. She wasn't just fighting against Marco. She was fighting against the circus itself. The circus was the true challenger, and it would demand everything from her. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, the weight of her words sinking deep into her chest. The ringmaster's smile faded, replaced with something darker, more solemn. "You have no choice. Once you enter the game, there is no turning back." Marco's revelation. While Celia stood in the dark tent, facing the ringmaster's cryptic words, Marco wandered the circus grounds, lost in his own thoughts. His mind was a storm of doubt and fear. The game, the challenge, none of it made sense anymore. What did victory mean if it came with such a high price? As he walked, he found himself standing before the large oak tree. It was the same tree where he had seen Celia earlier, where he had watched her summon light and magic. But tonight, the tree seemed different, as though it held some secret, something hidden deep within its branches. Marco's hand reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing against the rough bark. The moment his skin touched the tree, a strange sensation washed over him, a wave of magic, of understanding. It was as though the circus itself was whispering to him, urging him to listen, to feel. The circus was alive. It wasn't just the performers. It was the ground, the air, the trees. It was all one, and it was calling to him. And in that moment, Marco realized something crucial. The circus didn't just want to test him. It wanted to consume him. To take everything he had, everything he was, until there was nothing left. The cost of victory was not just a sacrifice, it was a transformation. The question was, could he bear it? The circus had reached its zenith. Every performance, every act, every flicker of light was more than just entertainment. It was a reflection of something darker, something hidden in the heart of the tents. The magic pulsed through the air, thick and alive, as if the circus itself was breathing with a consciousness all its own. And Celia and Marco, caught in its grasp, were beginning to feel the strain. The challenge that had once seemed like a distant dream, a game they could navigate with cleverness and skill, had become a nightmare. The circus was not just a contest of power. It was a test of will. A test of identity. And it was asking more than they had ever imagined. Celia's descent. Celia stood at the edge of the circus grounds, watching as the lights blinked on and off, the performers dancing in the glow of the lanterns, their movements graceful but controlled. There was a beauty to it, of course, but something in her chest tightened every time she saw the intricate acts, the perfect illusions. It was as if the circus was telling her that everything in her life, every moment of her magic, had been carefully orchestrated, carefully controlled, until now. But the circus wasn't about control. It was about breaking free, about becoming something greater than yourself. She had always been taught that power was something to be tamed, something to be measured. But here, in the circus, power was something to be embraced. And it terrified her. She couldn't deny the growing strength within her, the pull toward the raw, untapped magic that surged beneath the surface. She had already felt it, how the circus responded to her, how the very air around her seemed to ripple with potential. But every time she tried to reach for that power, something pushed back. Something invisible, yet omnipresent. The circus was alive, but so was the challenge. And it wasn't just against Marco. It was against herself. Celia's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind her. "You're avoiding it." Poppet stood a few feet away, her usual cheerfulness replaced with a rare seriousness. "The circus is calling you, Celia. And you can't hide from it forever." "I don't know if I can do this," Celia whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can let go of everything my father taught me. What if the circus takes me in ways I can't control? What if I lose myself?" Poppet stepped closer, her gaze soft yet firm. "You've already lost part of yourself by trying to control it. You're more than your father's lessons, more than the boundaries you've set for yourself. The circus is about transformation. But you have to choose to transform. If you don't, it will swallow you whole." Celia's heart pounded as she looked around the circus grounds, the glowing lights casting long eerie shadows on the tents. She could feel it, something within her yearning to break free. But would she have the strength to do it? "I can't lose myself," she whispered, almost to herself. Poppet placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not losing yourself, Celia. You're becoming who you were always meant to be." Marco's dilemma. Across the circus, Marco stood beneath the towering oak tree, staring into the shadows where he had seen Celia earlier. His heart thudded heavily in his chest, the weight of the challenge pressing down on him. He had spent his life in pursuit of knowledge, of understanding. But the circus, with its magic and its pull, was beyond his comprehension. The circus had started to feel less like a game and more like a prison. His mind, always sharp and clear, now seemed clouded. Every time he tried to focus, to make sense of the magic around him, it slipped through his fingers like smoke. What was he supposed to do? The circus had chosen him. But what did that even mean? The victory the ringmaster had promised, was it really worth it? He didn't want to win. He didn't want to dominate Celia, or anyone. He didn't want power for the sake of power. Yet the circus was making him question everything he thought he knew. It had already started to change him. As Marco's thoughts spiraled, a familiar figure appeared from the shadows, Mr. H. His cold, impassive gaze locked onto Marco's as he stepped forward, his presence looming over him like an ominous storm. "You look lost, Marco," Mr. H remarked, his voice as chilling as ever. Marco looked up, his heart heavy with dread. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it's not what I thought it was. It's not just about winning. It's about losing something. Something I can't get back." Mr. H raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "The circus doesn't ask for anything you're not willing to give, Marco. It only takes what you offer." "What if I don't want to offer it?" Marco's voice trembled with a mix of frustration and fear. "What if I don't want to play this game anymore?" The old man's eyes gleamed with an unsettling knowing. "That is the choice, Marco. You can choose to walk away from the game, but be prepared for the consequences. The circus doesn't let go easily." Marco swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Then what am I supposed to do? What's the right choice?" "The choice is yours," Mr. H said quietly. "But remember, the circus doesn't give you the luxury of time. Make your decision now, or the circus will make it for you." Marco's stomach twisted as the weight of the decision settled over him. The circus was more than a contest of power. It was a contest of the soul. And if he didn't act soon, he would lose everything, everything he had worked for, everything he had come to believe in. The convergence. As the night wore on, the magic of the circus reached a fever pitch. Celia and Marco, each facing their own struggles, felt the tension in the air grow unbearable. The circus was no longer a place of wonder. It was a place of tests, of trials. The ringmaster's voice echoed through the grounds once more, signaling the beginning of the final act. The challenge had reached its apex, and both Celia and Marco knew that it was now or never. They would have to face each other. But more than that, they would have to face the circus itself, and the price it demanded. Celia made her way toward the center of the circus, her heart heavy with the realization that she could no longer hold back. She had to make a choice. To embrace the circus, to let go of her past, or to walk away and risk everything. At the same time, Marco stood before the ringmaster, his mind made up. He would no longer allow the circus to dictate his fate. He would find a way to break free. The tension between them was palpable. They were no longer just competitors. They were two sides of the same coin, bound by the circus's magic, their fates intertwined. The circus would test them both. But the real question was, what would they be willing to sacrifice to survive? The circus, once a wondrous place filled with awe and amazement, now felt like a great, living creature, its heart beating in rhythm with the pounding of Celia and Marco's hearts. The ground beneath their feet was no longer solid, but shifting, trembling, as if the very circus was aware of the choices they were about to make. The final act had begun. It was in this moment, under the brilliant canopy of lights, that the stakes were higher than ever before. The circus had transformed from a playground into a battleground. The very fabric of its existence was tied to their decisions, and each move they made from this point on would ripple through the reality they had come to know. The whispers of the audience faded into a hum in the distance, and Celia and Marco stood facing each other for the first time in what felt like forever. The tension between them was electric, thick with the weight of the past weeks, the challenge, and the dark promise of the circus. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They both understood that this was no longer a game. It was survival. Celia's embrace of the circus. Celia stood in the heart of the circus, her body vibrating with the pulse of magic surrounding her. She had come to realize that the circus was not something to be controlled or bent to her will. The circus was a reflection of her own deepest desires, her own fears. It was a mirror, showing her who she truly was, and who she could become. She had spent her entire life under the watchful eyes of her father, trying to force her magic into the narrow confines of control and discipline. But here, in this place, she had been free to unleash the power she had always held back. And now, standing in the center of the circus, surrounded by the pulse of life and magic, she understood. She was no longer just Hector's daughter. She was the circus. Her fingers twitched, and the ground beneath her seemed to respond. Lights blinked to life in the air around her, swirling in complex patterns. The trees seemed to bend toward her, their branches reaching out as if they wanted to touch her. The circus was alive, and it was her. But with this realization came another. The circus didn't just give power, it demanded something in return. And that price, Celia knew, was not just a part of herself. It was her soul. She had already begun to change, to reshape herself into something that was both human and something else, something that belonged to the circus. But what was the cost? Was she willing to lose herself entirely to this place? A voice broke her reverie. Celia. She turned, and there he was, Marco. Standing a few paces away, his eyes locked onto hers. He looked different, but then again, so did she. They had both been shaped by the circus in ways they hadn't understood. And now, it was time for them to face what that meant. Marco's decision. Marco's heart beat heavily in his chest as he looked at Celia. He had spent so much of his life studying, analyzing, manipulating magic, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The circus wasn't a place of order, a place where reason could reign. It was chaos, raw and untamed, and it had seeped into his very soul. He had felt the magic that pulsed in the air around him, heard the whispers of the circus beckoning him to take part. But he had always believed that his intellect would be enough, that understanding would keep him safe. But now, that belief felt like a lie. Celia was right. This wasn't about intellect or control. It was about surrender. About letting go. Marco's hands shook as he took a step forward, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I don't want to lose myself," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. Celia's gaze softened, and for a moment, it was as if the world around them disappeared. There was no competition, no game, only two souls connected by the power of the circus, bound by something larger than themselves. "I'm afraid," Marco admitted, his voice breaking. Celia nodded. "I am too. But the circus is a part of us now. We can't escape it. The question is, will we fight it, or will we become it?" The answer was both simpler and more complicated than either of them could have imagined. The moment of choice. The ringmaster's presence loomed over them like a shadow, silent, watching. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, knowing that the moment had arrived. The final act was about to unfold. "Make your choice," the ringmaster's voice echoed through the night, deep and commanding. "Embrace the circus, or turn away. But know this, there is no middle ground. The game ends here." Celia and Marco exchanged a long, lingering glance. The circus pulsed around them, a living, breathing entity, and both of them could feel it. Could feel the power that ran through the very air, through their veins. Celia took a deep breath. She had lived in the shadow of her father's expectations her entire life. He had wanted her to be perfect, to control her magic, to shape it into something that could be used for a greater purpose. But she had realized, as the circus had woven itself into her very being, that perfection was an illusion. She could no longer control this magic. She could no longer hold herself back. "Celia," Marco's voice was soft, uncertain, as though he were testing the waters, waiting for her response. "I have made my choice," Celia said, her voice steady. "I embrace it. All of it." And in that moment, as the circus seemed to expand around her, the air humming with magic, Celia let go. She reached out, allowing herself to be engulfed by the energy of the circus. It was no longer something she could control. It was something she was becoming. The lights flared, casting a brilliant glow across the tent as the circus itself seemed to respond to her choice. The magic swirled around her, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The trees bent closer, and the very earth beneath her feet seemed to vibrate with life. But Marco remained still, his heart racing as he watched her. He had made his own choice. He would not fight the circus any longer. He would not resist. He would let the magic flow through him too. As Celia and Marco stood at the center of the circus, their fates sealed, the ringmaster stepped forward. "The game is over," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of eternity. "The winners have been chosen." The price of victory. Celia and Marco had both embraced the circus, but the price was more than either had anticipated. The magic surged through them, reshaping them, binding them to the circus in ways they could never undo. Celia felt the power of the circus course through her, blending with her own, until it was impossible to tell where she ended and the circus began. She had become part of it, its heartbeat, its breath, its very essence. And yet, as the magic pulsed through her, she felt the loss of everything she had been. She had become something more, but she had also become something else entirely. She had surrendered herself to the circus. Marco, too, felt the transformation. His mind, once so controlled, was now free, liberated by the wild magic of the circus. But as the circus's power surged through him, he realized the truth: the victory had not been worth the price. But there was no turning back. They had made their choices. They were bound to the circus, for better or for worse. The final act was over. But the circus would never be the same again.